So today we got Liam Edwards straight out of Japan, Kyoto, right here. So currently it's like evening in your time zone,
It's
right?
9 p.m. Just on 9 p.m. here.
9 p.m. and we are like in the middle of the day. That's
Lucky you.
awesome. Okay, so Liam is a game director at Q-Games, and he also has a podcast, which we already posted in the chat. And today he will be talking about stay game focused. Thank you, Liam, for being here.
No worries. Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to have been asked to come and talk. So, yeah, thank you so much. Should we jump right into it then? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's go.
Woo! Okay, so hello, everybody. My name is Liam Edwards. As you can see, I'm a game writer and designer and podcaster. Sorry, I was turning on the pointer. And this talk is called Stay Game Focused. The importance of focus when designing video games. What the hell this means should all become clear soon enough, I hope. And yeah, so why don't we just jump straight into it and start with an introduction. Look at my cute little robot. So let's start with an introduction. As mentioned, hi there. My name is Liam. It's lovely to meet all of you, and I'm honored to be talking at your university, I believe called University of Beirut. Please forgive my pronunciation of that. I don't speak German. And also, please forgive this vanity shot of me in Kyoto, because I have literally 0 pictures of myself. So when I was asked for a headshot, this was all I had. Just quick introduction about me. I was born in Manchester in the United Kingdom, and I grew up in Wales, which is a tiny part of the UK, Scotland, Northern Ireland, England, and then the baby brother of Wales. But now I live in Japan. As Linus said, I'm living in Kyoto in Japan. I've worked in the video game industry now for about 10 years or so, on and off. Kind of with a little bit of a break in the middle when I moved over to Japan. Basically took a break from video games, which I'll talk about in a little bit. I design games for work and also for fun. I pretty much think about game design all the time because I'm weird. I also talk a lot about them on podcasts and stuff like that, which some of you might know about. So designing video games and stuff is my existence. Outside of that, my other love is football, and I enjoy football and support the wonderful Manchester City because I'm from Manchester, not Manchester United. Screw that. And I was once stung by a jellyfish while surfing and now hate them irrationally, which is the only fun fact about myself. I used to really like surfing, and now I will refuse to go so just because I was once stung by a jellyfish. So that's me. For you to get sort of a taste of who I am and how I think about designing games, because, you know, we all play games and we all come from different pathways and different inspirations, I thought I'd share a couple of my favorite games with you, which is this magnificent lot of games from all different broad spectrums of video games, how I sort of think about design or what's inspired me in the past. We've got games like Super Mario World, one of the best Mario games. Recently, Sekiro, masterpiece of a video game. Final Fantasy VI, Breath of the Wild. Lots of wasted university days playing Street Fighter IV. Shovel Knight, friends of mine who work at Yacht Club Games, a wonderful game. Mario Kart Wii, my favorite Mario Kart. I challenge any of you to take me on at Mario Kart Wii. Lots of wasted university days on that one as well. Into the Breach, my friend Justin Marr's video game, just absolute tactical masterpiece. A Short Hike, which was one of my favorite games of last year. It's such a wonderful game. Destiny 2, I like jumping in and that and playing shooters now and again. We have Fire Emblem Awakening, great tactics game. The King, that is Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. I literally play it every day in the Q-Games office. Mother 3, which I actually realized I have a case of right here. So that's a good game. Noita has been recently one of my sort of inspirations. Like, I've been thinking a lot about roguelikes recently, which has inspired me to start sort of making my own roguelike prototypes. And I like playing the MMO Final Fantasy 14. So as you can see, sort of a mixture of games that inspire me from all different backgrounds. And I like thinking about them beyond just playing them. And I think that's what makes me me. So I want to just talk a little bit about my career so you can understand how I sort of ended up talking to you all today. So there's sort of a breakdown of my career. As I said, I've been working in the games industry now for about 10 years. So starting back in 2010, through to 2020. I first started a website called Hooked Gamers as a staff writer. I then was an intern at Gamespot in the UK briefly. Then I was a web designer for a weird period of time out. Just as I left university, that's when I joined Rockstar Games after that, which I'll get into in a little bit. Then I moved to Japan and I did some teaching and freelancing for a short time. I started a podcast while I was in Japan called Final Games. I then made my own indie games. I then did another podcast called the Dad and Sons Podcast. And now here I am today. This is a lie. I didn't actually start in 2020, but this is where I'm at present, which is Q-Games as a game director and designer. So this leaves out working in a game store, being an ice cream man, a chemist's assistant, a waiter, and like my 20 other jobs that I've done outside of video games. Quick thing, if you are someone who's studying game design or you're studying how to make games and you're worried that you're never going to make it and that kind of thing, literally there is no set path to get into video games. You can do so many different things. Don't worry about it. One day, if you keep working at it, you will work in games. So I did like 30 jobs before I ever got into video games. So don't worry about that. So to get into each of those different jobs I've done, I first started out in the industry working basically for a sort of non-profitable Dutch video game website called Hooked Gamers. Don't know if anybody's ever heard of it. It's a very, very small website. I just was a volunteer staff writer, unpaid position. And I did some writing of news articles, some reviews and previews. And I attended press events for the first time. That's when I got to go to Germany for the first time and go to Gamescom actually, which was amazing. As you can see, here is my Gamescom 2011 press pass, which was my first like treasure as somebody who was inspired by video games. I loved it. And my nice anecdote from that press conference is this man here is called Seth Keelian. He was the producer for Street Fighter IV and Marvel vs. Capcom 3. And he actually, funnily enough, the final boss in Street Fighter IV is called Seth. And it's named after this guy. And he was the Street Fighter World Champion. And I challenged him to a game of Marvel vs. Capcom 3. And I beat him. So that's my only claim to fame, because I'm terrible at video games. But this was a lot of fun, and it basically solidified my want to work in video games even more, because I just love talking about them. So that led me to go to one of the biggest video game websites in the world and become an intern, which is Gamespot. And I was working in the UK office of the website. I was basically just an intern as I was finishing university, so I was sort of balancing like the final part of my computer science degree and also wanting to then go on and work at GameSpot and being super excited about that. It was my first real taste of the video game industry. Like, there was a lot of pressure. It was not a joke. They were a business. They were making money based around video games. It was my first real experience of like, you can make money working in the video game industry somehow, even though I was not making any money because I was an intern, unpaid for 3 months, which at the time was fine, but now you shouldn't do. Don't go work at an internship without getting paid. My roles included recording game footage, writing news and previews and all that kind of jazz. And it was actually my first experience with podcasting. I got to be a guest on their podcast at the time, which was listened to by like 20,000 people, which was huge for me. Just this kid who had some ideas about video games, and it inspired me to like podcasting alongside wanting to make games. And I was mentored by some wonderful people, including this guy, who some of you might know as Danny O'Dwyer, the man now who runs NoClip. At the time, he was working at Gamespot UK, and he taught me how to do a lot of what I know now, video editing and podcast editing and stuff like that. Danny's a great guy. So yeah, it was super cool to see him go on and do stuff like NoClip. And then after leaving university, going and being a web developer for a couple of months and sort of finding out what I wanted to do, I actually got an offer from a friend to apply for a job at this small indie studio, Rockstar Games. And I worked at the Rockstar Games Lincoln office. So Rockstar is split into many different studios around the world. There's about 20 of them. Rockstar North is the main studio, and then Rockstar New York as well. And I was in their Lincoln office, which was their huge QA studio. Now, GameSpot was a real taste, but this was my first real taste of the video game industry. This was no joke. I was straight out of university. I'd been and done some, small websites for local businesses, and then all of a sudden, I sat down at my first day at Rockstar, and I was put in front of basically an empty map of what became Grand Theft Auto 5, one of the biggest games of all time. It was so amazing as somebody who was inspired by video games and wanted so much to be in the industry to then all of a sudden be sat down in front of what would become one of the biggest video games of all time. And basically it was like having to keep the biggest secret I could ever possibly be asked to keep because I wasn't allowed to tell anybody. So while I worked at Rockstar, I started out in QA. My roles included extensive forms of testing, whether it was art testing or single player testing, multiplayer testing, DLC testing. I was writing bug reports all the time. I was liaising with developers on issues. I was leading large teams on large scale efforts, and I was a bug vetter, which is something very unique to Rockstar. We had our own internal testing engine and sort of our own tools, which we call Bugstar. If anybody's actually played Grand Theft Auto 5, you'll know there's this mission where you sort of, I think you rob a jewelry store dressed as pest control, and the actual van on the side said Bugstar, which was a nice little nod to our QA tools at the time. And essentially, I was leading large teams. I sort of became a senior, and I was, it was almost like herding sheep. I'd have like 60 testers to fill out a lobby, and we'd have to try and get them all to do like missions together and driving together and all this kind of crazy stuff. So that was such an incredible learning experience, like leading large scale teams of people. There were times when the Hauser brothers, the actual guys who own Rockstar, would come and join us, and it was like everybody had to be on their best behavior and you had to do very strict things. And as you can imagine, Rockstar is very like, you have to do this, and it has to be like to the top standard, which meant that I became a bug vetter, which at Rockstar was like a very special position where you were kind of like the senior of the senior. So we were sending hundreds, if not thousands of bugs to the developers every day. And they had to be neatly written. They had to be concise. They had to hold all the information for the bugs to be fixed. And we needed basically devs to spend the least amount of time as possible. So my job was to go through the whole database for that day and basically completely check and rewrite and readjust and re-record videos for any of the bugs so that they were all like the Rockstar standard, if you could say. It was a lot of work. And during that time, I got to work on games like predominantly GTA 5, which was most of my time. I worked on GTA Vice City Mobile, GTA San Andreas Mobile, and also then just before I left, I got a little bit of working on Red Dead Redemption 2. I mean, this was 5 years ago now, so that tells you how long games take to make. So that was what I predominantly did. Also, it was my first experience of crunch, and ultimately the reason why I left as well. Crunch sucks, especially if you spend 4 years at a studio and 2.5 of those years are complete entire crunch. 6 days a week, 12 to 14 hours a day, non-stop. But I learned a lot, so much actually, about the production business of making video games, and I made some incredibly valuable friends. So even though the experience wasn't all that good, it was an incredible experience where it put me in good stead to where I am today. Rockstar was an amazing time, and possibly how I've learned most of what I know today, actually. But then I moved to Japan because I thought, well, I don't want to work on video games right now. What is the craziest, stupidest thing I could possibly do? And that was to fly all the way to the other side of the world and basically live in a country I'd never lived in before. So I moved to Japan. And when I did, it meant I was free to do whatever I wanted, because when I worked at Rockstar, I was not allowed to talk about video games online or in social media and stuff like that. So I started a podcast. And I started this podcast because I thought so much about this idea while I was working at Rockstar that I thought it was such a good idea for a show, which never really happens. And basically, it was this premise that I would have a video game developer or a video game industry member, and I would strand them on a deserted island. And on that deserted island, they could only take 8 games with them to play for the rest of their days? What did they choose and why? So if all of you now can quickly think, if you were trapped on a deserted island, what 8 games would you take with you? And basically that was the show. And I would talk with some of the most incredible people in the world who make games. People like Lucas Pope, who I actually worked with a little bit on Obra Dinn. I helped him out a little bit with that. Derek Yu, who made Spelunky, Nina Freeman, Bruce Straley of The Last of Us and Uncharted, Kelly Wallach, Greg Lobanoff, Justin Marr, who made Into the Breach and FTL, Harvey Smith, who made Deus Ex and Dishonored, and so many more people. It was an incredible time, and basically it was the first time I made something by myself and built it up. And actually, it won a whole bunch of awards, including the UK Games Media Best Podcast Award in 2016. This says 2015. Please ignore that. I made a mistake. But yeah, Games Media 2016 Best Podcast. And also, it was actually GQ Magazine's Best Video Game Podcast of 2016 and 2017 as well. So strangely enough, this podcast opened a lot of doors for me because I was talking to all of these game developers about their games and they knew I made games. So that meant I got to do some freelancing and help out with some stuff. That led me to start loving making video games again. So after about a year or so of just like taking it easy and not working in video games, I wanted to make games again. But I was in Japan and I didn't know anybody. So I just started making games by myself, which I imagine a lot of you now who are students are doing. So basically I learned how to use GameMaker and Unity, predominantly GameMaker. And I started making these games in my spare time. One of them, which was my first game, which is this game right here, was an endless runner, kind of inspired by Cannonball. And it was themed around a Japanese salaryman, this little guy, trying to get to work. So basically he'd just run and he'd jump over blocks that were different colors that you had to match, and you'd get a high score. It is bad. Don't play it. Don't look for it. Don't do anything. It was my first learning experience in GameMaker, and it taught me a lot, but it's not very good, so please don't play it. But that led me into my next project, which I wanted to make a bit bigger, and I was learning all about finite state machines, and all this wonderful GameMaker tools like DS struct lists and arrays and all that kind of stuff. So I started making a game that was inspired by Downwell, an amazing, incredible mobile game made by a friend of mine called Opin. And it was basically a Castlevania cross Downwell, where this little vampire guy would fly up a tower as fast as possible whilst having like a fly meter, which drained as you fly. And I just had a lot of fun doing pixel art and all that kind of stuff. I did a lot of sound and programming and promotion, and I learned so much again about making games outside of QA and also being a project manager that it was fun, and I got me enthusiastic about games again. And I released both of these projects on itch.io. Most of you might know about itch, especially considering the Black Lives bundle that has just happened. In fact, Flitzpire actually made it to the top of itch and was #1 on itch.io for a week. And even though it was only a demo with 3 stages and a boss fight, a lot of people enjoyed it. Some people even streamed it on Twitch, which was incredibly new to me. It was amazing to have people interested in what I was doing. And that sort of inspired me to continue onwards with game development. And that also led me to talking to other people, including these 2 fine fellows who are my sort of co-hosts in another podcast called the Dad and Sons podcast, which is strangely enough probably the thing I'm known most for, even considering I make video games for a living. It's a weekly video game podcast that never really talks about video games. It was started by myself and my 2 co-hosts, Super Bunny Hop, George Weedman, who is one of the best what do you call it, YouTuber analyst of video games on the internet. He's insanely popular and he's very, very good at what he does. And then Matt Visual, my lovely friend Matt, who was a big Guild Wars 2 YouTuber back in the day. And then since then, we've had some incredible guests on the show, including Barry Kramer, previously of the Game Grumps, YouTubers like NitroRad, Racevic, Low Spec Gamer, and of course, Jim Sterling. And we've had some incredible people come on. And currently that show is listened to by over 60,000 people a month, which is why the hell do 60,000 people care about what we think about video games? But it's quite amazing. And because of that, I get a lot of questions about game design and stuff a lot because I talk a lot about game design on it. And basically that led me into pursuing even further and ending up at where I am now, which is Q-Games as a game director and a game designer. And I've been here for 2 years now, making games. It's my most recent adventure, and I actually joined as a game planner, which some of you might not know, but in Japan, a game planner is what they call a game designer. It's not quite the definition of a game designer. It's a bit of a game designer and also a bit of a producer. You're expected to be able to run your own projects and also schedule them, which traditionally would be a producer's job. It really helped because I had to learn not only all of the things I'd been doing, like designing games and all of this different thing, but I had to also start planning for milestones and then producing and all that kind of stuff, which helped when I became a game director. The studio is ran by my boss, Dylan Cuthbert, who is the former programmer for Star Fox. If you don't know who Dylan Cuthbert is, I highly recommend you Google him because he is quite an interesting fellow and he's had an amazing journey starting at Nintendo when he was 18 back in the 90s. And since I joined Q, I actually co-directed and designed the Apple Arcade title, Scrappers, which is this wonderful thing here and this logo I'm wearing on my t-shirt today. And basically my roles at Q have been including prototyping, designing, direction, creating tasks for team members, liaising with managers and PR teams, and so many other stuff. Because when you work at an indie studio, you pretty much don't have one role, you have many. And you have to do lots of different things to keep the studio running. Even though we have about 50 people now at Q, we still have to, dip our toes into doing lots of other things. And I get to make games in one of the most beautiful places in the world, which is Kyoto, which is amazing to me because Kyoto is the home of Nintendo, which is the studio that have inspired me to be where I am today. And when you work in the games industry in Japan, you get the wonderful privilege and luxury of getting to hang out with some of the most incredible people in the world. As you can see, this is me looking so goofy because I'm so happy and smiling because these people here are legends of the games industry, including my friend Matt Walker, who is the executive producer at Capcom for Monster Hunter and Devil May Cry. You might know him as basically the face of Capcom Online. Next to him is Eiji Aonuma, who is the director of Zelda. And next to him is Hideki Kono, the guy who created Mario Kart and also Yoshi's Island and so many other incredible Nintendo games. And then this lovely lady here, my friend Aya, is the director of Animal Crossing. So obviously Animal Crossing has blown up across the world. And this is little Aya, who we go have barbecues with in the summer. She's amazing. And next to her, Noah, who's an artist on games here as well. So I'm constantly inspired by not only the environment of Japan, but also the wonderful legends of people who get to live here. I don't deserve to be able to mingle with these people, but I just happen to live in a really lucky place. So it's been super inspiring, which has led me into developing games like Scrappers, which is my most recent title. And before we jump into the main bit of today's talk, I'll give you some background on this game because I'm going to use it as an example quite a fair bit. Scrappers is a 1 to 4 player beat 'em up about collecting trash. As you can see, there's lots of trash themed elements in it. It was released on Apple Arcade in April 2020. So if you have an Apple Arcade subscription, you can go play it right now. Not right now, but like right now after the talk, because that would be nice. It's 1 to 4 players, local and online co-op. Players play as robot trash collectors moving through the post-apocalyptic world of Junktown. Very shoddily named, but it works. It was inspired by what we call in Japan belt scrollers, which is, side-scrolling beat-em-ups. Games like Final Fight, Streets of Rage, Castle Crashers, Captain Commando, Shank, and so many more. We pretty much played every beat-em-up you can think of when we were working on this game. So it's inspired by a lot of those. And it just recently came out. So we sort of kind of haven't celebrated it yet because we've all switched to working from home. So it's still very fresh in our mind and we're still working on it, working on bugs and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's been exciting. So with all that out of the way, I've wasted all your time talking about me. let's jump into what exactly it is we're talking about today. Today's main course. I'm just going to have a quick sip of water because my throat hurts. Game focus. Now, what do I mean by focus? Focus is the practice of making sure everything in your game serves your core design. So focus by dictionary definition means to sort of be the center of your interest, to pay particular attention to. So when I mean focus in the essence of game focus, I mean that this is the idea that your core design is your center of interest, and everything around it has to serve that core. Everything you ever think about in your game has to serve your core design. That is that should consume your mind. That is the center of your interest, and everything revolves around it. So this is something I made about how I think of games as a designer, me. A lot of people might think differently, but this circle, layer, onion thing here is the way I think about games. So in the center, we have the interest or activity, the dead middle, what you should be thinking about when making games, which is the core design. And core design is your base. It's your foundations. It's the objective and the most important element of your game. Without it, everything crumbles and falls apart. And then around that, we have the primary design. So the primary design is your level design, and it's your moment-to-moment mechanics, the basic player user experience. So you might have, the sort of the sort of meat of the game, which is your core design. Everything has to revolve around it, starting with primary design, which is white boxing and how the player moves and maybe what the theme is and that kind of stuff. And then the basic player user experience. And then after that, we actually have the theme. So, the basic presentation, the story outline, the audio, preliminary art and animations, all of the sort of nice little, the parts of the game that people are going to look at and go, ooh, that looks nice. That's like the starting part of that. After that, we have secondary design, which is, the game UI, the player progression, the player customization, shops, game economy, items, and additional gameplay extras. All of the stuff that you start building up upon having already a structure to your game. The stuff that makes the game go the extra bit further. How do you make the game even more interesting is the secondary design. And then the final part, which comes after all of this, is the final polish, which is your gameplay balancing, your tweaking, your final art and animations, your cutscenes, your VO, your voiceovers, your final audio, and also your background music, PR, and marketing, and everything that encompasses that last 10% of making a game. But that comes last, hence it's called final polish. So even though I think of games like this, and I think as the core design as the center, you can actually start at any moment with these. So if you have like a particularly good piece of concept art, like you want to make an alien platformer, for example, and you have a really good piece of concept art of the alien, that's great. But you have to go back to the core design and start from there. So you have an alien platformer, well, what does it need? It needs an alien, it needs platforms, it needs jumping, it needs movement. So even though you had a nice piece of concept art, you've got to go back. So even though you can start with any of these, everything always goes back to core design. And your game just can't work without a really solid core design, which means that everything you ever think about has to fit the focus of what that core design is. And this is super important. And sort of what I reiterate to my team all the time is that when we think about focus, it has to be serving our core design. And sort of as we move outwards from the core design, go to the primary design, your level designs, your theme, your art, your secondary design, which is your, the nice polishy bits of game UI and player progression, it becomes easier to determine what that focus is, right? So if we move on, core design and focus are not the same thing. I know you're thinking, well, if you have a focus and you're thinking, oh, my focus is this alien platformer, that's not really what your focus is. It's your core design. you can have many different types of core design. If you are thinking like, if you try to explain a game to somebody, how you explain it tends to be what your core design is. So if you think an alien platformer, I'm making a game about an alien that jumps between platforms. It's one sentence, easy to describe. If you're making a magic rugby game, that's easy to describe. If you're making a card battle system with maybe a scissor twist, you cut the cards in half. It's easy to describe. This is your core design, but it's not your focus. Your focus is basically everything. Everything else that has to fit that core design. And unfortunately, everything that goes into your game, whether it's your character design, your game feel, your marketing, your PR, your social media, your game mechanics, your story, your game name, sound effects, blah, 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 all of this stuff, it has to serve your core design. So when we think about it, it's just basically like, it's a filter. It's the thing that you let in and stop. If you have lots of art and audio and everything going into your game, you're opening the filter. Does this match our focus? We're making an alien platformer. Is it got alien themes to it? Does it fit with the alien theme? Yes, no, yes, no. It's like applying a filter. It's really difficult to do, and it's something that takes practice, but it's like applying a filter. How do these things serve your core? And sort of that's what we're going to get into. It's like the yes and no answers of making a game. Become a sieve. I don't know if you know what a sieve is. A sieve is like what you use for pasta to pour the water through. Basically, the pasta is your core design. You want all the water to go through. It's kind of like a sieve. Stupid reference. So, why is focus important? Well, my whole presentation so far has been blue and orange and white, and it's been neatly presented. And now I've changed everything on this one slide. That's not very consistent, and it doesn't match what my core design of my presentation is, which is orange and blue and white. Focus helps with consistency, and consistency is everything. If you have players playing a game and you're making this alien platformer and they're jumping as an alien and they're having a great time, and then all of a sudden they go to the next level and they're playing a soccer game, they're going to be like, what just happened? Why am I now playing a soccer game when I was playing a platformer a second ago? It's an easy example of why consistency is super important. So focus helps with the consistency of the game. The next part is that focus helps you create a strong identity for your game. If your theme is an alien and suddenly everybody's a dog, does that match the alien theme? I don't know. You could argue it does, but not really. It's hard to justify. So if someone describes your game, they're like, oh yeah, it's this great alien platformer, but there's dogs in it. That doesn't have a strong identity. So for example, with Scrappers, we were creating a game that's about robots collecting trash. We created this strong identity of sticking to our theme. They look like trash collectors, they're kind of dirty, and they all fit the focus, which is trash collecting robots. So focus can help with creating a strong identity for your game. I mean, consistency and identity, this is what happens when you don't abide by those laws, right? Old design Sonic for the movie does not fit with the focus of what Sonic looks like. That's why he's so horrifying. And then new Sonic, he's pretty consistent. He has a strong identity because he matches the identity of Sonic that we already know. So focus can kind of help you avoid stuff like this. Focus also can help you with finishing games, because finishing games is really hard. I don't know how many of you have started a project, but how many of you actually finished a project from start to finish? Finishing games is super hard. And basically, focus can help you with scope. If you're making an alien platformer, Is the Alien platformer going to be 40 hours long like an RPG? No, it's not. An RPG hour length is not going to fit the focus, right? You want to make it tight and long. But if you are making an RPG and it ends in 5 hours, is that consistent with the focus of the core design? Are you building up those things? Probably not. So focus can help you understand the kind of minimum and the maximum of what your design is. Focus can also help you find what's good about your game, and it can really strengthen that. So if you take games, for example, like this skewed Dark Souls image over here, Dark Souls' core is about slow, difficult combat and traversing a world, an interconnected world. So how do we build upon that with Dark Souls and keep our core strong? Well, we keep making the player fight increasingly difficult battles while increasingly tougher enemies appear. And that helps it with strengthening what's good about Dark Souls. Why do people keep playing that game over and over and over again? And even though it's super hard, what makes them want to go back to it? Well, it's this really strong, consistent core that is constantly just strengthened by everything they've added. Aesthetic, audio design, the weapons, the entire map, everything just fits around this difficult game core that they've made. So focusing on what is going into your game will help strengthen that. And this is a personal opinion of mine, and games that are largely designed by committee, which means basically everybody has an opinion and everybody is basically giving ideas to the game no matter whether or not it fits or it doesn't, is middling and it's average, right? No game can please everybody. And the games that try to please everybody have just lots of random stuff thrown into them to see what hits. And that isn't really very good, in my opinion. And we see that sometimes in AAA games, and it's why maybe some AAA games kind of tend to be average, right? We're not talking like Grand Theft Auto and stuff like that, but sort of maybe, AA releases that come out and they kind of rip off other games, or they take ideas from a lot of other games and they don't do it very well because they've not thought about the focus. These games tend to just be very average, and that's because they have no focus. They're not creating a strong identity. They're not consistent and that kind of thing. So focus can really be important because you're serving your core design. So even though I say all of this, and it sounds really strict, and it sounds like, oh no, you have to think literally about every minutiae detail that goes into your game, focus doesn't mean you don't have to be weird or wild, right? You can have the craziest game ideas in the world. You can think of like, I'm going to make a game that requires me to paint as a lion, and the lion is riding a bike at the same time. You can go really stupid with your ideas, but if you do make a stupid idea, try to stick to it. Don't deviate and go and do other things. Don't try and incorporate, right now roguelikes are really important, and then make the game a roguelike because roguelikes are really popular. Or if it's not a shooter, don't make a shooter element to it. If you're making a weird game, just make sure that game also has a focus as well, and you're sticking to that focus, right? No matter how much a game might look weird, you'll find that it's probably still very consistent and it sticks to what its theming is, even if it is a little strange. So go wild, but make sure that you're still serving that core design. So to sort of describe this better, because as I said, I am rambling about this a little bit, I'm going to use my game because I understand that game better than everybody as an example as to how we go from core design to making these decisions that have to fit our focus, applying this filter of letting things in and saying no to other things. So Scrappers is a 1 to 4 player beat 'em up about collecting trash as robots. It's so easy to describe because we nailed our core. You get it immediately. You're like, oh, okay, so I can play either by myself or with another player or with 4 players. It's a beat 'em up. That's a popular genre everybody knows about. And it's about collecting trash as robots. Super simple, super easy to describe. So how do we get to make a game out of this sentence by supporting the design by using our focus? Well, it's a game about being a robot, So are we going to add human elements into the game? Does that seem like a good idea? Does the human fit our filter? Is it going to go through it? Probably not, right? If you start saying, I'm going to make a game about robots, and then the first character everybody meets is a human, that's not good. That's not consistent with what you've already set the player expectations up to be. So we're going to make sure that our filter is closed, and we're not going to add humans into it. That's super simple. So a lot of games, you're collecting coins, or you're collecting treasure, or you're collecting power-ups and stuff like that. But we're making a game about collecting trash, literally the element of collecting trash. So are we going to add like all these power-ups and traditional economy game stuff like coins in Mario and that kind of stuff? No, we're not, because we're already collecting something. So we don't need to add more collection elements into the game like Banjo-Kazooie, where you're collecting every different thing on the map. We don't need to. Our game is already about collecting. So we don't need that. But we're now missing some sort of economy. So why don't we make the trash the game economy? That's a good idea. So now, not only have we applied the filter and sort of, decided that we're going to focus on this collecting trash aspect, we also have expanded our design by thinking that we can utilize our core to be another part of the design, which is the game economy. So players collect trash and they get money. And it's a 1 to 4 player beat 'em up. So it's got to have beating up enemies. But if it's 4 players, is it going to work if we make it in 3D and we make it like first person? Is that going to fit the focus of what we're trying to go for? No, it's not really, is it? Because one, it's hard to see 4 players on the screen at the same time if it's first person and in 3D. Even if you maybe don't make it first person and you make it third person action and you can see 4 people, it's still difficult to maybe replicate to players this kind of street fighting beat 'em up style. And of course, most beat 'em up games across history, whether it's Castle Crashers or Scott Pilgrim or Final Fight, have all been 2D. So we're going to use 2D because that fits our focus of a 1 to 4 player beat 'em up. We're going to use this. We can see our enemies, we can see all 4 players, we can see the trash, and we have a nice lovely art style as well. So we don't need this. We've got rid of it. It doesn't pass through our filter. We've already gone through and served our design nicely. We've got robots, we got collecting trash, and now we have the 1 to 4 player beat 'em up there. So this part is easy. All of you could have done this, right? But it starts when you get into the tiny bits of the core design and you need to start expanding upon it, that it becomes more difficult. So even though I've said the game is about collecting trash, how do you collect trash? There is a million ways you could do it. You could do it with your feet. You could do it with your hands. You could do it with your mouth. You're a robot. You could pick it up magnetically. You could do all sorts of things. So you have to sort of narrow it down by using that focus and thinking, what is the most suitable thing for this? So when we were designing Scrappers, we knew that we wanted to collect trash and throw it because we're going to have 4 players. So it's going to be cooperative. You're going to pick the trash up and you're going to pass it along and then try and put it in the back of the truck. And then when you do, you get money. So passing, well, the easiest way of passing something is like a ball. So like in basketball. So let's do that. Start passing it. That'll work. That's absolutely fine. That's the focus. But we also want to do this thing where we stack all of the items, right? We want the players not to have to just collect 1 piece of trash. We want them to collect multiple pieces of trash, and then they're going to throw them. So if we have a really heavy stack, like something that looks super heavy, if we're then throwing it like a basketball, does that look good? Does it look good if somebody's lifting something really heavy with ease, like Superman, and then just like passing it like it's as light as a feather? That's not really good, right? Even though they're robots and they're kind of strong, if we don't sell the weight of the stack to the player, it's going to look cheap and it's not going to match with our core design that well. So we have to, rule this out, no more basketball, and we have to look at other things to fit our focus. which strangely enough, design inspirations can come from the craziest of places. I looked at a thing called caber tossing. I don't know if anybody's heard of this before, but it's like a old Highland Scottish game where in Scotland, they basically have like a strongman contest to see who can throw these big, heavy wooden logs into the air for as far as possible. And as you can see with this guy here, with the strain on his face, this log is really heavy. What else is really heavy? Our trash stacks are really heavy. You've got this big giant vending machine and a microwave and a chair and a radio. It's pretty heavy. So if we kind of replicate this, this is going to feel really good. So this doesn't fit our focus anymore, but this does. So we change the animations of the way you throw the trash to match something that gives our focus, you know, serves our core a bit better. This idea of throwing a big heavy stack into the air. And it works. It just works so nicely. So from this example here, we've taken, you know, the simplicity of our core and we've focused it down. We've gone from one thing to another thing. That didn't work. We apply the filter and we try something else. So always you're thinking about this focus. And we ended up, when players throw the trash, now they throw it from underneath. So it gives it some weight. Like it really pushes this throw into the player. And we're really happy with it. So that matched our core design because we spent time focusing on it. The next core design tenet is that it's a beat 'em up about collecting trash. So there are two halves here, right? You've got the beat 'em up part of the game and then the collecting trash. So even though we've described how you collect trash, how do you balance fighting enemies and also collecting trash at the same time? If somebody asked you to play a soccer game, but then all of a sudden you had to be in a sword fight, how are you going to balance that game, right? You have to think to split them up, but then how do they mesh together? So once again, we have to think about the core design focus. The player wants to be doing a beat 'em up, and they also want to be collecting trash at the same time. So when we come to think about that, we have to think of our combat to be pretty simple, because if you're trying to collect lots of trash and then immediately have to try and fight enemies, if it requires difficult button inputs, the player's gonna not be able to do it, right? They're thinking about trash, and they're thinking about collecting stuff, and then all of a sudden they've got to enter like a Hadouken or like a Shoryuken movement and press every button on the screen. It's not gonna work. So we look at the focus and we think, okay, what serves the core tenet best? Well, let's make a simple but faithful beat 'em up combo combat. So you tap the button, you press the button multiple times, whether you're using a touchscreen or a controller, it's the same. And it's this nice, quick, fast combat system. And it serves the game nicely because now we can do all sorts of different things with the game, which is we can have this beat 'em up part and we can have this collecting trash work harmoniously together. But the game is going to be boring if we do that all the time. So then when we think about our stage and our game design, we came up with this idea of spots, like garbage spots, essentially. So you have our little garbage truck, which you can sort of see behind me here, the lovely Scrapper's truck. And players follow this along like a traditional beat 'em up 2D screen that keeps moving along. And then sometimes it will stop. And when it stops, you're in what we call a spot. So these are the spots. And when we design the spots, they have to match the core design, right? It either has to be about beating people up or it has to be about collecting trash. So we do a bit of both. We have spots that have lots and lots of trash. So the players feel like they're collecting trash and they're getting lots of combos and they're getting a lot of money because that's what they get when they throw it into the truck. And there's not that many enemies. You know, they don't have to think about fighting enemies and collecting trash at the same time. They can just focus on the one part of our core design, which is collecting trash. But that's also kind of boring, right? There's no enemies to fight. So then to match the core design and keep that focus going, we created enemy heavy spots, which is the idea that spots have lots of enemies and the player is just fighting enemies and they can barely pick up trash and there's no time to collect anything because they're fighting and they're having like their heart rates building up. You know, they've had this nice relaxing time where they get to throw trash around and be playful and that kind of thing. But then they have to be, you know, ready to fight. And they use the simple combat system to beat people up. and they're having a great time, like a traditional beat 'em up. This is the Streets of Rage portion of our game. And this matches our core design. We've thought about the focus, and we've thought about what do we need to do this? Well, we're going to have to design our stages to have both beat 'em up and collecting trash elements. But if you just do these two all the time over and over again, the player comes to expect moments. They're like, oh, there's a lot of trash here, I'm only going to collect trash. Oh, there's a lot of enemies here and there's no trash, I'm going to be fighting enemies. So then we thought about the focus a bit more, and it's like, well, how do we keep mixing it up? And that is to basically make a balanced spot, which has a lot of trash and a lot of enemies. So then players have to think about, what do they want to do? What part of the core design do they want to engage with? Do they want to fight enemies, or do they want to collect lots of trash? It's up to them. They can do whatever they want in these spots. And basically, it ended up being that if you had 4 players, 2 players would sort of be the defenders who would then go and fight all the enemies and protect the other 2, and the other 2 would collect the trash. And there was a lot of teamwork involved in these spots. So this literally was like the essence of our core design, this beat 'em up and collecting trash combined together. So everything here is built in mind by focusing on our core design. All we ever think about is the beat 'em up and the collecting trash. And then everything else just builds upon that to make sure that we're bringing this strong identity that when somebody describes Scrappers to somebody else, they're like, oh yeah, I've been playing this really fun game where you get to fight robots and you also get to, collect trash and you're passing it to friends and stuff. That's it, right? When they describe it, it matches the core. That means we've done a good job by everything we've added has matched that focus. Which means that when we come to decide everything else that fits that, it's easy to be like, okay, robots fight other robots, collect trash. But how do you build out a game based on focusing on these things? Well, you got to sort of think about what is your core theme. So our theme is trash. It's a world full of trash. It's a garbage world. Everything has to just be garbage. So when it comes to designing everything else, you got to keep that in mind. That's your focus. So our focus was trash. So when we design characters, and they've got to be robots because that's our core design, we're going to make them look like they are, trash collecting robots. They've got like workman overalls. They look like maybe they work in a garage or some sort of mechanical thing. And they're a bit dirty. Like you can see the dirt spots on them. They're a little beat up. It matches with this theme of everything's a bit dirty and a bit garbage. It's not to insult the robots, this is my lovely Ichiro and Saburo, but they are dirty, and the saturation of the colors matches this theme. We have brightness, but his top doesn't look very clean. It's a little dirty. And most importantly, they are robots, as our core design is about robots. So when we design characters, check, it matches our focus. We apply the filter. Do they look dirty? Do they look like trash? Do they look like they would be garbage collectors? Yes, everything fits the focus. So then most importantly, we've got to think about trash objects. And we're going to make trash that looks like trash, right? But we can stretch it a little bit. So we got typical trash objects, stuff like a garbage can and a bag, broken tires. In Japan, surprisingly enough, people lose umbrellas all the time. So we put like tied down umbrellas together. Aircon units that are broken, very traditional here in Japan to find those on the street. Broken microwave, gas canister, and pylon. We're just making, sort of not quite normal day objects, but stuff that wouldn't look out of place on the street. Like if you saw, a tire or an aircon on the street, you'd be like, oh, it's broken, it's trash, it's going to be thrown away. So we made all of these objects make sure they fit our core. There's nothing crazy, or nothing too crazy that is a trash object in our game. We have like surfboards, and we have power generators, vending machines. But even then, all of these still fit. The player thinks, oh yeah, definitely that's trash. Because if you're designing a game with lots and lots of things on the screen, the player has to know what looks like a trash object and what has to be the rest of the game, right? So you're making sure that the objects that you want the player to pick up looks like trash, so the player is drawn to them. And it's got to fit that focus, Does it look like an object you would find on the street? Yes, it does. Matches that focus. Check. So then, obviously, our game is a beat 'em up. Players expect from beat 'em ups that there would be some kind of weapon design or some kind of fun weapons to play with. If you think of games like Castle Crashers or even Streets of Rage where you had a pipe, there's going to be weapons. So unfortunately for us, we have to make some weapons. But what do we do with the weapons? Well, we make them look like trash. We make them look like they're built out of junk, that they fit this sort of world that we've created. You know, we have some sort of handsaw here that's got dirt all over it, even though it's got these weird, like, kira clean things that we say in Japan. You know, it's filled with, like, dirt, and it looks like something you'd find in a junkyard. So same with everything else. Like, even though this is a katana, it's just a big blade with a screw handle. It looks like you would find it on the floor of a junkyard. It's not something out of place. Same as the baseball bat, which is, you know, traditional junkyard object. If you've ever watched The Warriors or something like that, street fights where you'd find like broken baseball bats, it matches with that sort of trashy theme. There's no assault rifles, there's no rocket launchers, there's no actual weaponry. Everything looks like it could have been made from junk. I mean, even here we have our take on a grenade launcher, which is our gas canister launcher. And we made this because we already have gas canisters in the game, so we can just fire more gas canisters. And it matches the idea that the robots are sort of building these weapons out of trash because that's all they have, and it matches the focus. You know, we have the hammer, and it's sort of a big block of metal that's just strapped together by seat belts. All of this fitting the focus means our truck designs have to be the same. We have our typical standard green truck, but you know, it's a garbage truck. It's what players are used to, right? This doesn't look out of place. This looks like a garbage truck. But if we want to make custom designs, they have to fit the focus. So they look beat up, they look a bit destroyed, they look like they fit in the world, and they fit our core design. Which means that everything you build, literally everything that goes into your game, has to sort of match up with that very simple one sentence that you've decided in the very beginning. That is your core design. If you decide that you want to make an alien platformer, most of your designs have to be alien looking. They have to match with this alien theme. If you want to create a game about trash collecting robots, you've got to make sure that everything has either some sort of robotic theme or some sort of trash theme, whether it's your gameplay or your art or your animations or your music. All of it has to be focused around whatever that core design is, and then only live to serve it, because then you're making a strong identity for your game. If, like, I am biased because I made it, but my art director Yamamura-san has done an incredible job with the way he designs all of our objects. They have saturated color, so they look dirty. They all look like they use the same color palette. They're all very bold in vector art. They stick with the focus. They don't deviate. They make sure that we are creating a strong identity for the game. And hopefully to players, then that leads to them having a successful time with the game. But obviously Scrappers is sort of a misnomer of an example because it's a game I made and not many people have played it yet. It's come out on Apple Arcade. So let's look at games that everybody knows about, like Zelda. What is this? What Link is this? This is not Link. Nobody wants this. That's Link. This is the Link we know. So if anybody doesn't know, this was concept art that was found for Breath of the Wild, right? So before Nintendo were making Breath of the Wild, they were thinking of different ways to take Zelda, which eventually we got Breath of the Wild, this wonderful open adventure game. But this was one of the things they come up with. And the problem with this is not what you think it is. It's not the art, which is goofy looking. The art, you know, is very different to what we're used to with Zelda. It's the fact that Link is modern. He's wearing jeans. He's got like biker gloves on and a sports jacket and a guitar and a motorcycle. Like, what Zelda game has ever been in the modern world? It doesn't fit the focus of the series. It's not what players are used to. It's not consistent with the world that's been built up about Zelda. Art style doesn't really matter. You know, we've got Breath of the Wild, we've got 3D Zelda, 2D Zelda, Wind Waker, but they're all consistent. They're all this fantasy world that we're used to. If suddenly they make a game where Link has some sort of modern outfit, or it takes place in 2020, it's going to be very, very strange to players. That doesn't mean it wouldn't be good, but it's just, this is an example of how the focus doesn't match up with already consistent player expectations. But even though this motorcycle doesn't fit, it doesn't mean the idea isn't good. And it doesn't mean that you can't do something with it. For example, we got Breath of the Wild, you know, Link's wearing a very different sort of outfit to his traditional one. That's a good idea, but let's make sure it fits the focus. Hey, let's just make a goddamn motorcycle in a Zelda game. And even though this would not work, this works really nicely. Because even though it's a little strange, it matches the focus of the game, which in Breath of the Wild is this sort of weird, wormy, sort of strange design. And so the bike is designed like this. But at the same time, the motorcycle has changed from being a motorcycle to something consistent with what players expect, which is, this is designed like a horse. Link has always ridden a horse, right? He's always rode a Epona. That's the English name for the horse he rides. So if we design a motorbike that looks like a horse, it doesn't feel inconsistent with what the Zelda focus is. To players, it feels very, very consistent. So this is pretty good. Even though we started with this idea, we've iterated upon it and we've iterated upon it until it fits our focus. So then, even though we have Link on a motorcycle with bow and arrows, we have Link on a motorcycle with bow and arrows. You can get from this and you apply the filter, you apply your focus, and you end up with this. And it's pretty good. The motorcycle DLC is really fun. So that's Zelda. Let's look at Mario. And Mario is weird. Mario is super weird. All we think about with Mario is the dude who runs from left to right. You know, he just runs across the screen and he jumps and he does his thing and it feels really good. But if you ever actually thought about the world of Mario, like, this is weird, right? There are floating blocks. There's mushrooms with faces. There's a giant bullet with a face on it. The world of Mario is super weird. And Nintendo have always stuck with that because it doesn't matter with Mario. You can create something weird, but as long as you focus on it, you can stay and create a good game. So even though Mario has had some weird adventures, you know, he's been in basically the nether zone where there's not even a floor. He's been on a stage play. He's been into space. He's been into so many different places. The thing about Mario is that this stayed like this. Nintendo stuck with what the focus of Mario is throughout the whole of Mario, which is Mario's jump and running and his movement is like the best feeling thing in the world. And all they've ever done is built upon that. They kept Mario's worlds consistently strange, but it's never detracted from the fact that players just want to run around and they want to jump and they want to slide and they just want to do what Mario does. And that's the focus, right? The core idea of Mario is a platformer where you just jump around. So all of the other stuff is just supporting that core. When you look at this Bowser level, it's really strange. But all I want to do is run down here and jump and run and jump and run and jump. So the level supports the core design. Same with Mario Odyssey, which is arguably the strangest Mario game ever made. All of these hills just make me want to run around as Mario, right? They look odd, and it's like, why is Mario in some form of Mexico? But I want to jump on these buildings. I want to jump and dive and do what Mario does. And it's because everything is fitting to the core, which is Mario runs and jumps, and that's never changed. So Nintendo have done a good job with Zelda and Mario to make sure they stick to the focus of those series consistently. And it's led to, you know, some incredible games over the years. But, you know, Mario and Zelda tend to be easy examples because everybody knows about those games. So let's look at one of the best indie games of all time. Well, one of the best rated indie games of all time, just sort of to top off our example spree. Spelunky. Spelunky is a game that took inspiration from spelunking, which is the exploration of caves. especially as a hobby, right? Not a professional thing. It's like a hobby. And this is what spelunking looks like. I don't know if any of you go spelunking, because I don't, and this does not look very fun to me. Why would anybody want to do this? But it's muddy, it's dark, it's a cave. It's muddy, it's dark, and it's a cave. The theme matches with what the focus is, right? The idea of this game is that you're exploring. It's a randomly generated thing where you're exploring through a dangerous place. What is dangerous? Well, a cave is pretty dangerous. And a cave's easy to navigate. Not particularly unless you have rope and a torch and you've been there multiple times. So the random generation part of Spelunky matches well with the idea of a cave. So we have this, this theme that already is serving this core, this exploration, this danger that Spelunky wants to give matches really well. And then all we do is we build on top of it. Exploring a cave, we need some bombs, blow up some rocks. You want to go down a cave, we need some rope. Let's use some rope. And, we're exploring a cave. We kind of just want to make sure we're getting some adventure out of it. Well, when you adventure, what are you looking for? Well, you tend to look for gold or you look for treasure. And in mines and in caves, we found gold in the past. So Spelunky is about collecting gold and sort of making sure that you've got loads and loads of money. And who is one of the most famous explorers and adventurers of all time? Well, in pop culture, it's Indiana Jones. So Spelunky takes a little bit of Indiana Jones to serve its core. And it makes sure it nails that theme by having all of these things through the filter and make sure they fit the focus. And it just works so nicely that even the enemies of Spelunky fit that focus really nicely. It's a game about being in a cave. So we're going to have spiders, we're going to have snakes, and we're going to have bats. Because what do you think you would find in a cave? That's dangerous and matches the theme. Well, bats and spiders and snakes would be a good example. And also possibly cavemen, because who else lives in a cave, right? So all of this, Spelunky is such a good example of a game that has a core design that maybe has nothing to do with its theme, right? It's exploration in random generation and just surviving. But the theme holds up that core really nicely by just matching really well. And Derek Yu is an incredible designer of video games, and he knows very well how to make sure his focus is so tight on his core, and everything matches that really nicely. So justifying choices can be tough. I really think there should be a spaceship in this baseball game. These kind of questions will come up when you're designing games, right? If you're designing Spelunky and all of a sudden you want to have aliens, you've got to be able to justify that. And justifying these choices can be tough, and sometimes they will be worth it. In Scrappers, we have basketball and we have volleyball and we have basically like racing, like betting racing. And justifying adding those additions into Spelunky into Scrappers was really tough. So sometimes, even though your focus is really tight, you can let some things in if you can justify them really nicely. So justifying your choices can be tough. And that usually means that if you can argue your justification well enough, it's going to be good. Which then leads us into our final sort of portion of this talk, which is about how you find your focus, right? I've talked so much about what focus is and about how focus helps games, but how do you actually get a focus? Like, how do you make sure that this is the practice you're applying, right? You could search deep within yourself, but not really, right? It's not as easy as that. So you need to do some stuff. For example, prototyping. If you're starting an idea, if you have an idea in your head, you're like, this will be a good game idea. You need to prototype it before you even take any further steps, right? Or if you have a good piece of concept art, as I mentioned, you then want to prototype something that matches the concept art to see if it works out. So you got to take the time to experiment, try as many ideas as you can to see what can, fit. And then it will surprise you when all of the ideas you thought were good don't work out at all. And the idea you thought was really bad ends up being the thing that works the most. So prototyping can really help you find what is good about your game and also what is fitting that core idea. So this is a picture of my desk, and This is everything I have at my hand at one moment. I have pen and paper to write down everything, got my iPad, and then I make thousands of post-it notes of different ideas and different things that I would think match my focus, or even crazy things that wouldn't match my focus. So prototyping can really help. Arguably, one of the most important things that you should be doing when you're trying to see if your game is working out and it's consistent and it's got a strong identity is you need to be playtesting. And I mean, playtest your game, lots. It amazes me how many teams I've worked with where members don't bother to play the game. Like, how are you supposed to know if an idea that you thought of is working? How are you supposed to know that if you're making a game about dogs, that you added a cat in, is the cat working? You don't know unless you play the game, right? So you've got to be playing the game and making sure that everything you're putting through your filter, everything that's going through your focus is matching. So every time you add a new feature, every time you add some new art, does it fit? Does it stay consistent? And playtesting is the only way you can find out. When you're starting out, you're in production, just playtest internally. You don't need so many outside perspectives. You don't need anybody messing with your focus. You know what that focus is. So you don't want other people diluting the water. So, in the beginning, just stick internally with you and your team, maybe. And then iteration, right? So we got prototyping and playtesting. These two things will lead to iteration. Because even though a focus is like applying a yes-no filter, sometimes stuff like Link's motorbike, the really bad modern motorbike, turns out with iteration and refocus, it turns into that really good idea, that DLC motorbike. So with iteration, you can keep adding to ideas to make sure that they match your focus, right? So this is actually a screenshot. Oh, well, it's sort of like a mock-up art of what Scrappers was like in the beginning. It's got enemies, it's got some trash, and it's got 4-player teamwork. But it's not this, right? It's not lots and lots of trash and lots of enemies and lots of different things to interact with. It has no focus, really. It's barely anything there. So with iteration, we went from this to something like this. And that's because we applied the focus. We made sure that everything we added into the game was matching with our theme. And the only way we did that is via prototyping and via playtests. So once you've done that, how the hell do you keep the focus? How do you spend 1 year or 2 years, or in Max's case, who's in this call, 4 years making a project and staying focused? Because when you're trying to make a game and you just think about game ideas all the time, it's so easy to start adding other game ideas into a game. But you can't. You've got to stay focused and make sure that this game, it has its identity. So don't lose the focus. Keep design documents. I don't keep design documents when I make games solo, but when I work in a team, you've got to make sure that everybody on your team knows what the focus is and they understand what the design is. So design documents are self-explanatory. It's a document that breaks down everything in the game. If it's an alien platformer, everything in there is about the alien. It's about how the alien looks, how the alien moves, how the alien interacts, how the levels look. Do they look like alien landscapes? If you have a document, everybody understands, which leads into style guides, which is sort of similar to design documents, but these are more for like thematic stuff. Style guides can be however your art looks, how you design characters, how the music sounds, how all the sound effects have to sound, or even how all the balance and tweaking in your game has to be, how weapons have to interact for the player. They all have to feel the same, right? If you've made 10 weapons and you make an 11th weapon, but it feels drastically different to all of these weapons, it's not going to fit your focus. So these kind of style guides will help you stay consistent and keep your identity in that game. On top of that, if you're making a game by yourself, blogging about it and making devlogs is a really good idea because it's a good practice to write down justifications for your design. If you're writing something down, you're reflecting on it at the same time. So if you've just implemented a huge new feature into your game that maybe you're a little concerned about how players are going to respond to, well, writing about it justifies that idea. So you're writing down and it makes you reflect on what you've just done. Does it match it? Does it match the focus? What is it doing to your game? All of these things are really easy to think about when you write them down. So blogging about it could be a good idea at places like TigSource, which is a really good devlog website. And then if you're working at a studio like I do, team reviews this goes without saying, you and your team need to be reviewing everything. The production, the features, the art, the animations, everything. All of you need to be making sure that everybody stays on the same wavelength about the game, and that if something gets added to the game and is maybe not working out, you've got to all be together and take it out, right? And even if you have a team, somebody has to be making those calls, right? There has to be somebody who is the leader, who is saying, they're the guardian of the focus, right? They're the ones who are like, this matches, this doesn't, this piece of music doesn't sound right in the game, or this animation doesn't feel like it matches the aliens movement, all that kind of stuff. So team reviews are really important. And from team reviews, you have milestones. And this is a little different, but milestones basically helps you finish games. So setting yourself targets means that all of those crazy, wonderful ideas you have, you got to cut them down. So you've got to just find the ones that fit the focus really nicely so you can meet your targets. So having milestones will help you keep concise, make sure that everything is going into your game is serving the core nicely, and it stays consistent, right? You're whittling down what you need to achieve to get the game finished. And then finally, as I said, most important thing of all, just be playtesting your game. Never stop playtesting, even if it gets boring. And even if you can't understand whether your game is good or not because you played it 1,000 times, it doesn't matter. You need to be able to look at it and keep checking to see if everything's consistent, that every new feature is being added is staying within the confines of supporting the core. And as the development moves along, now is time to get external playtesters, right? QA to come in and make sure that they feel everything is cohesive, and ask them, does it have an identity, right? You might not have fresh eyes anymore. So asking those guys, hey, is this stay pretty consistent? The game is an alien platformer. Does it feel like an alien platformer? That's where you got to be asking these questions. So ultimately, with focus, you got to learn to say no. Just say no. If somebody says, I want to add dogs into our alien platformer, dogs are cute, dogs are great, you still got to say no, because it's not going to work out. You've got to learn to say no when you're making games. It's really hard. Some ideas might be great. Some ideas might be really bad and easy to say no to, but those great ideas might come along late in development, and they might change the game a bit too much that you have to say no. So hierarchical structures aren't such a bad thing for game development. Don't be worried if you do have a lead or you are the lead. Just learn to say no, because it will stay consistent. It will help your game stay strong in its identity. And when players play the game, they will understand that everything in the game so far is serving that core. So learn to say no. This is really important. So let's conclude. I've talked for so long about focus. So once again, why is focus important? Here's a random forward focus because I couldn't find a picture to do with focus. Consistency. It's not just for you, but it's for your players too, right? Your game has to stay consistent. Dark Souls, Super Mario, Final Fantasy, Spelunky, every good game that you can think of, they stay consistent, right? Their levels change and maybe the gameplay changes, but in your head, they have a picture, right? And that picture is, whether it's the art or the gameplay, there is a nice consistent picture in your head of how these games feel. And that's what focus helps to achieve. Consistency, not just for you, but also for your players. Focus helps with creating a strong identity for your game. And it's helping to appeal and stand out to players. If you've got art style that you've stuck to, or you've got music that you've stuck to, and even gameplay mechanics that maybe they can't see yet, because that takes to feel, as long as it's got a strong identity, it will appeal and stand out to players. And focus helps you understand what is required to finish the game, determines your scope. It's really good for understanding what is your minimum and what is your maximum. How much do you let through the filter, and when do you say no and stop things coming through the filter? If you're making a platformer, how many hours? 8 to 10 is a good range. If you're making an RPG, how many worlds does it have to have? If an RPG is going to be 40 hours long and you only have one world, that's not a good idea. You're going to have 5 to fit that focus, right? To support that core. So focus can help you determine what your scope is and finish the game. And focus helps to amplify what's good about your core design in the game, right? With Scrappers, our core was just about collecting trash. So we just kept adding to the collecting trash element. How does that support it? We made it arcadey. We made it simple to throw trash and have some fun. We wanted players to build these big stacks of trash. So everything was built around just that good idea of collecting trash. And that's what Focus helped to do. It helps to amplify what is good about your core design and make the game stand out even stronger. So thank you so much for listening to me talk for so long. I apologize. I hope it was insightful and useful for all of you. If you have any questions, now would be the time to do so. Thank you so much. I'm just going to take some water.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Liam, for the great talk. You did not disappoint us at all. So you gave us some great insights. I think we will start with the questions from the beginning of the chat. If you want to speak for yourself, feel free to do so. The first question is by Max Pierce. What is your method to create the core design?
Creating the core design, I think, is possibly the easiest part of the design process, right? Everybody has a good idea for a video game. But to flesh out the core design, you need to be prototyping. You need to make it. Even if you start with a good concept art, like, I really like this dinosaur. How does that transfer into some sort of core, right? So you make a prototype with a dinosaur and see how it feels. Prototyping is the best way to find your core. But try to stick to that one sentence, right? When you describe games to people, you can usually describe games in like a sentence. And that's the easiest thing to do. Just make one sentence game. It's a game about wizards in a football tournament. There you go, right? And then you just prototype that and see if it works and then build upon it. Prototyping is easily the best way to flesh out that core and find it.
So with the core design, you also showed your onion graphic thingy.
Yeah,
so how important is communication between each one of these design rings?
It's incredibly important, right? So even though you might actually, I think I can just probably just go back. There we go. So even though it's tough to understand these things, maybe as a team, because you have so many members of the team, as long as you have stuff like your design document and your style guides and references that people can get to, everybody should be on the same page about design. But still, then some things get lost in the communication. Maybe people talk through chats and they don't talk face to face. It's hard to understand the nuance of design. So you need to be talking, right? If you're the guy who's the level designer and the guy who's making all the player progression isn't incorporating like the end of a level, it's not gonna match, right? So you need to have the communication and understand the focus, right? That's a little more of a traditional sort of game cohesion, like how is a team working together? But it's super important to make sure that all these are communicating in between.
So the next question is by Marcus. Would you say that there's a point of no return when you're invested in a game idea? And is there by any chance a WALL-E, the movie, Easter egg in Scrappers?
So I'll answer the second part first. Actually, we are currently in the process of a huge update to Scrappers, like our summer update, and we're adding in. So when you play the game solo, currently you're just kind of on your own. We didn't have time to add in like an AI buddy. So now we've spent the time and we spent the past 2-3 months designing like an AI buddy who will now follow you along, and he's kind of inspired by WALL-E. So actually you are correct. It's not in the game right now, but it will be in the game very soon. So yes, there is a reference to WALL-E soon. And sorry, what was the first part of the question again? Sorry.
The first part of the question was, what would you say that there is a point of no return when you're invested in a game idea?
Yes. Same as anything, right? Sometimes you spend so much time prototyping, you spend 6 months trying to put something together, but it just doesn't work, right? Not every core idea is going to work out. And there are two things you need to do. You need to either stick with it and finish it. There are so many good articles out there by people like Derek Yu about how to finish your game. And actually, even finishing a bad game teaches you more about making games than ever just giving up on it. So there is a point of no return. But if you've invested so much time already and you need to finish the project because you're being paid to do it, or there is a budget requirement. You need to stick with what you've got. And then through the practice of adding to it, through focus, you can stay pretty consistent and maybe it will turn out right. Or maybe you'll be able to find something that amplifies it, that makes it better. But yeah, there can be points of no return, but sometimes you just kind of got to stick with it, because finishing a game will teach you way more than just finish. Like, how many prototypes do you have, right? I have like 50 to 60 prototypes I've never finished, and they will stay that way. But for every game I do finish, I learn just so much more.
This is also something Quinton last week told us about, that it's important to have a kind of portfolio ready when you want to work somewhere and have projects done. And I think that's really good advice.
Yeah. I've worked with I've worked with plenty of people whose portfolio is all games that got cancelled, NDA games that got cancelled, right? And it's like, how long have you worked in the industry? Oh, I've worked in the industry for 15 years. Oh, what games have you done? One, because the other 8 I worked on all got cancelled. So yeah, they kind of can suck, right? So it is better to stick with a game even if it's bad, because if you're the artist on a bad game, doesn't mean your art was bad, right? Maybe the gameplay sucked, but your art might have been amazing, and it's better that the game comes out so everybody can see that art.
So the next question is by Michael. He asked, regarding your point about Zelda and fans not expecting a modern Link, how would you feel about deliberately going against those expectations? What if Nintendo said, all right, guys, we're going to make a full-blown Zelda in modern setting? It could still be good, just not what the fans are used to, right? Another example would be DMC, or Devil May Cry, I guess, which had a very different Dante that fans didn't like, but was still a good game.
Yeah, and a lot of people still didn't like that game, right? So I would think of it in 2 ways, right? So let's take a game that is really, really different, which is the Mario and Rabbids XCOM clone game, right? Kingdom Battle. That's so crazy and weird and different, but when you play it, it still has so much of the weird Mario-ness about it, right? Mario, there's literally a move in the game where Mario like bounces off things into things. So it takes a lot of what is consistent that players understand about Mario and adds it into a game that's really, really weird and really, really different. So that worked out. But with DMC, if you put a screenshot of like Devil May Cry 5 and DMC from Ninja Theory together, they look a lot alike. And just because of these small focuses that changed, that didn't match up with player expectation, even though the game was kind of very similar, a lot of people just weren't happy with it because it deviated from what they were used to, and it took away that strong identity. So sometimes if you go against maybe a consistent focus that players expect, it doesn't work out. But there are ways, as I said, you can be weird. You've just got to stick to the weird. You can't sort of middle ground it and like take parts of everywhere like they did in DMC. You've got to go full Mario and Rabbids Kingdom Battle and go super strange, and it should work out.
So essentially DMC didn't change enough?
Yeah, it changed because the combat is quite similar, right? And the only things that did change really about it were like the attitude and personality of Dante, which is a character who's beloved by many people. So you're changing a character that already a lot of people like, instead of just making a new character that is like Dante's son, right? Like they did with Nero. And the attitude he had was like this weird British kid, and I'm British, but it's kind of annoying and kind of weird because it just doesn't fit the Devil May Cry universe. So even though they kept so many similar things about Devil May Cry, there were these key things that they let through the filter, which just changed the entire philosophy of the game, right? So that shows you, if you don't sort of stay consistent, even though so much of the game is really consistent, if you let in some things that just don't match up, players are going to be like, what the hell is this? Who is this weird Dante that I'm not used to? And then, unfortunately, even though maybe the combat was really good in that game, a lot of people just immediately dismissed it because it was so not what they expected.
All right, thank you.
No worries.
The next question is by Max Pierce again. He already left, but he said, sorry I need to leave early, but great talk. Thank you very much, Liam.
No worries.
the question. So we get 4 more questions. The first question is, you mentioned about design by committee. Who is it? Do you believe should make those core design choices?
It's hard to like distill that down, right? So if we take it from an indie studio perspective, if you have like 15 people working on a game, that's enough that everybody can have a voice, right? And everybody can say stuff, but you still need somebody to be the designer or the director, the person who is taking everybody's ideas, and then they're the person who is saying no and yes and no. So I think hierarchical structures are still pretty good, even if your team is small. I actually think at AAA studios, it's easier because the team that usually decides everything tends to be a really small design team at the top of the hierarchical structure that people like programmers and QA just never get to talk to them. They never get to say their ideas. So actually, if you think of Nintendo games, they tend to be, all of those design decisions get decided by 4 or 5 people who act as like the actual director and producer and designer. So it tends to be easier to just give commands to everybody else, whether that's good or not. But it does mean it stays consistent. So if it's consistently bad, then the game is going to be bad. But if it's consistently good, it doesn't get filtered by everybody's saying, oh, I don't like this. Oh, I like this. Or, oh, we should do this. Or, oh, I think this is a really stupid idea. And like, sometimes in indie teams, you have everybody shouting at you all the time about, oh, this is good. I should do this. We should do this. So it can be tougher. But if you tend to have like a design team or somebody who is like the director, like at Nintendo, they have basically they have the director and then the executive producer. And those guys basically take ideas from the design team and then they decide, and then nobody else can say no. And that's how you get games like Breath of the Wild and stuff like that. So it depends where you're at, but there usually needs to be somebody who is the person who is saying no, whether it's a director or a designer or a producer. As long as somebody is applying that focus and saying no, it should be okay.
Now, you already talked about indie and AAA studios, so the next question relates to that. What have been some of the differences you have found from working at AAA studios, indie to solo projects?
It's always creativity, right? Games are hard to make no matter where you are. If you work in AAA, you have to work crunch, there's big expectations. You work on huge mechanical projects that are just massive, and that can really suck because you have no creative input, right? So as I just mentioned, right, when you're at the bottom or you're like one of the people who is a specialist, an artist, a programmer already, the creativity might be stunted because you're basically being given tasks to complete. So even though you're an artist, somebody says to you, I want an alien platformer, you have to draw an alien, right? And you have to make concept art that's about an alien, whether you like it or not. So that's AAA. When you're an indie, it's tougher because unless you're, sort of in charge, thankfully, as the director I am, you've got to take everybody's ideas, and it can be hard to keep everybody happy. It can be hard to make sure that the best ideas are shining through, and everybody wants to say their opinion. So your creativity has to be balanced with everybody else's. And then when you're on your own, you can do whatever the hell you want, but you have to do it by yourself. So you're only limited by what you're able to do. If you're a great designer, but a terrible programmer, even if you have great ideas, if you can't program them, the game is going to suck, right? If you're a great programmer and you're a great designer, but you suck at making art, well, your game might have the best game mechanics in the world, but it has terrible art, so it might not appeal to people. So there are struggles in every aspect of making games, and it suits some. Like there are a lot of indie developers now who can do a bit of pixel art like myself, and they can also program or script, and they can also then design really well, and they can make stuff. But it's a lot harder. If you work for a studio with a small team of maybe 5 to 10, I find that's almost the perfect sweet spot of like, you've got an artist, you've got an animator, you've got a programmer, and then you have like a director. And then all of you can sort of creatively come together to build a game. And I feel like that's the sweet spot of making stuff. It's tough everywhere.
So the next question is maybe more of an athletic question. How far can you caper toss?
I wish I'd been sent to Scotland on some sort of like mission to find out about caber tossing, because that would have been sweet. I don't know. I'm not that strong, really, to be honest.
So you have not tried yet. Damn.
I've not tried. No, I grew up in Wales. I didn't grow up in Scotland, so I didn't get a chance to. But I'd go though. I'd definitely give it a try. That'd be fun, wouldn't it? Yeah, just put into practice the old scrap animation. That'd be good. I'd definitely give it a shot.
So, next question is, do you have any tips for prototyping? What makes a good prototype for you?
Yes. For me, I make loads of prototypes in GameMaker because it's fast and it's easy to make prototypes. You don't need to be able to learn. You don't need to be able to program to learn to use GameMaker. And even if you want to learn programming, GML scripting is really easy. So I suggest GameMaker for prototyping. If you want to make 3D prototypes, then Unity is the best way to prototype because you can get free assets from the Unity store, and then you can also make 3D games. And Unity is fairly easy to use. And there's a lot of stuff like Playmaker, which is like a visual scripting tool. C++ and C# are very common. So you can use those with Unity as well and build your own components and stuff like that. And what is a good core design? It's honestly the simplest answer. Are you having fun playing it? Because if you are, it's a good core. That's what games are. Games are fun. And this comes from me. Like as you saw with all the games I like, a lot of the games I like are like Sekiro, Mario Kart, Smash Brothers, tactics games, games like Destiny 2. All of these games don't really have any story. They don't really have anything thematically important to them. They're all about the core mechanic, right? They're like Mario games and Zelda games where the core loop, the fun loop of the game is what is fun for me with games. Games should be fun. I think storytelling games can be great. Stuff like A Short Hike is kind of like a storytelling game. And Life is Strange and those type of games. But for me, those are not really games, they're more experiences. That's not to say they're not games, but they act as more of an experience for me. Whereas the games I want to play are all like fun. So when I'm designing a prototype, if the core loop is fun, I've done a good job. That's all that matters.
So now you mentioned some software for prototyping. Would you also do you sometimes use paper prototyping?
Yes, actually, one of the prototypes I recently built, I actually made sort of like a chess spin-off game. And I basically just used a chessboard with paper cards and dice and didn't need and I played that for 6 months because everything I could do in a video game, I could do physically. The video game would just speed it all up. So I didn't need to build it because I already had it. I think definitely so currently I'm making, like in my own spare time, I'm making a sort of like a golf roguelike. Like I've combined these stupid ideas together to make something that's this fun, like golfing roguelike. And with that, I design all of the holes for it on paper, like in Photoshop. I design like the structure. I basically block them out before I build them in GameMaker because it's faster for me to like draw them and erase them and then draw them again and then build them all out and then basically just copy them with like white boxes in GameMaker and tweak them. So yeah, I still definitely draw things on. I have like an iPad here and I use this a lot to write down game ideas and stuff like that. But nothing can beat playing it, right? So once you've got some stuff down on paper, I do recommend if you can build it, give it a try. Because at the end of the day, it's a video game. It has to be a video game. And if it's not fun as a video game, but it sounds good on paper, it's still not that great.
Awesome. Do you have experience with creating board games?
No, I don't really, but I would love to. I just don't think I'm smart enough. Board games are like complex. I had one idea for a board game, and it was more of a card game. And I sort of made it, and we played a couple of games of it, and it was really fun. It was a kind of a spin on Cards Against Humanity. I don't know if anybody's played Cards Against Humanity, which is like a card game where you kind of have like a question or a paragraph, and then you have to fill it in with funny answers, and everybody has like cards with answers on them. And basically the person who makes the host laugh the most wins. So I built an idea around a storytelling version of that where you would have like 60 seconds to add like movie theme cards in a row and create like a story and try and make the most interesting story. And we played a lot of it and it was really fun, but I kind of didn't finish it. So I have made one. I don't think I could make a board game. I'm not smart enough.
Well, there's still some time left. Maybe on your
There
30th
is.
birthday. You never know.
Maybe, yeah. When I get bored of making video games.
Yeah, you got it. Next question is by Lena. When you start writing a game design doc, at what point in development would you say is a good time to establish a game design doc? And because it's a lot of work to keep it up to date and stuff, what is useful?
So updating it is probably the hardest thing. Starting it is the easiest, right? Just start with that sentence. Just start with a picture, like a picture you drew on a napkin with what you think the game looks like, and that one sentence that I've said. So Scrappers, we literally wrote a 1 to 4 player beat 'em up about collecting trash with robots, and that was just the front of the document. And then everything else you do, from where you're prototyping, from your concept art, and everything, just start sticking it in as you go along. Try and update it as much as you can. Like, we would update ours every month at the end of the month, like, just for our own sanity to add, because when we're working with Apple, we need to tell Apple what everything we've done, right? So all of the new features, all of the new stuff that we're adding. So we had to keep on track. So at the end of the month, everything that we'd committed into our repository, like all of the big new features, we'd slap them into the document and then build it up. You don't need to add everything. You just need to add the structure of the game. What does it look like? How does it play? What are the levels? What are the items in the game? What are the characters? All that kind of stuff. It's almost just like an instruction manual that is a technical document that explains everything.
So it sounds like you also need to stay focused while writing a game design doc.
Hell yeah, because sometimes I've seen a game document, I've actually seen the game document for Metal Gear Solid, and it was like 300 pages long. And I'm like, who the fuck wants to read that? Like, nobody. Like, if your game document is more than like 20 pages, then you've probably got a bit wrong, right? You need to condense it down and make sure that everybody can keep up to date with it and just keep adding to it.
Awesome. So the next message is by ST. Hey, Liam, great talk. Totally agree with the importance of cohesiveness in all elements of a game. What do you think is the best way to get a team aligned behind a specific definition of the game's focus? As with big, complicated games that mix gameplay and theme, there can be multiple interpretations of what a game core design is.
It's hard. That's the hardest part, right? You have to convince everybody on your team that it's a good idea, right? The core might be a really good idea, but then when you start branching out into theming and stuff like that, that's when maybe people get upset. They're like, oh no, this character should look like this, or this character should have this kind of personality, and that kind of stuff maybe less so matches the focus and becomes more about arguing about semantics about the game. But you've got to start with the core. If everybody's on board with the core and then you tend to stick to that, you're just amplifying something you already all agreed on. And then you kind of stay, tight. In Scrappers, thankfully, from beginning to end, we just knew what we wanted to make. And it was the only time in my career so far where there was very little we disagreed about. There were some things that we added to the game that we found out later just weren't working. And then we'd have discussions about, should we take them out? But it was almost always unanimous that we agreed on what should be done because we all knew what the focus was. Thankfully, Scrappers isn't that big of a game. So when something wasn't working out, we all agreed, well, this just doesn't fit the focus. Let's get rid of it. And then it was so easy to be like, what if we make a big sumo robot that does these things? And it's like, well, it's a robot. So that fits the core. Let's do that. And then everybody just agree on those things. I think when you get into the semantics of designing tiny things about the game, like how the level layout should be, or how characters should look, or characters should talk, that's when you find out you argue the most about things. Like names of characters will... Everybody wants to name a character because they have some sort of ownership over a character. And that's the kind of thing that you end up arguing about a lot. So not necessarily your focus or your core design, because core design will only ever go forward if everybody agrees on it. And at that point, that's pretty good.
So with how many people did you work on Scrapper?
So we started out with a core team of 5, and we ended up with about 15 or 16 on Scrappers by the end. So actually, there was a prototype made before I joined the team, and then I joined the team to be a game director to basically do what I've talked about today, which is to make sure it stuck together and to make sure everything fitted that focus. And I was kind of like the mercenary who came in to just make sure it stayed on this course. My co-director, Arioka-san, who actually you can see in this lovely screenshot here of the playtesting, he was the guy who came up with the initial idea, and he's an incredible creative person to work with, and we both just understood each other the whole time because we understood what the focus needed to be and what was serving the game. You can see a broken boss in the background over here. So yeah, we even though we started with 5, even as we grew, everybody still was basically briefed on what the focus is of the game. And even by the time we got to 15, everybody still just understood what we were trying to achieve with the game.
Awesome. So the next question will be a bit Japan focused by Natasha. So
Sure.
what are the differences of working in the games industry in Japan and working in Western countries?
It's weird. So the games industry in Japan it's big, but if for the foreigners, everybody knows each other, right? There are not that many foreigners who work in the Japanese industry because it's really hard to get a job in the Japanese games industry because Japanese companies will always hire Japanese people over foreigners. So that means if you do get hired, that's because you're really good, because you were worth taking on over Japanese staff. You're worth the effort of language barrier or cultural differences. So a lot of the people who tend to be foreigners who work in Japan tend to be very, very good at their job and very, very good at what they do. So the culture is very professional. A lot of the time, it's not like working in a game studio. It's like working in an administration office. Everything is by the book. Everything is really solid, like a Nintendo, one of the most creative places in the world. They all wear uniforms and they all work in a big white building that looks like a dentist. It's strange. Japan is really professional and really by the book, whereas Western video game studios are exactly as you'd imagine. It's a bunch of nerds working together to make something they've always wanted to do. So in Western studios, you'd have like video game posters on the wall and everybody's desk would have figurines on it and stuff like that. In Japanese offices, less so. At Q, we have a nice mix of foreigners and Japanese staff, so we kind of have a bit of Western influence in there. So, I have some stuff on my desk at work, like amiibos and stuff like that. But yeah, if you go to Nintendo, no, it's like clean and you'd be amazed that this is the place where Mario came from.
Crazy.
It is crazy.
So you already mentioned like how you got into the industry, but was it hard to get into the industry in Japan, and how did you come to get in touch with the games industry?
Yeah, this goes back to what I said at the beginning about there's no set pathway into video games. So obviously I moved here and I had no idea what I was doing. I was doing some freelancing. I was doing some consulting as well. That's how I ended up on helping on games like Obra Dinn. But I didn't know I was going to make games again. If I wanted to stay in Japan, that was, as I said, right, you have to be the best of the best. And I just wasn't that, right? I don't think I am. So I had to basically just meet people. And I went to events and I started doing the podcast. And I started talking to game developers on the podcast, which made me be introduced to more game developers. And everybody knew I worked at Rockstar, so I had some gaming background then. So people kind of listened to what I had to say. And I just went to events and I met people. And then one day I was making Flitspire and I was just working by myself. And Dylan Cuthbert, who owned Q, was basically like, do you want to move to Kyoto and help me make games? And I was like, yeah, sure. I'd actually had an offer to work at Capcom previously. So Capcom is in Osaka, but Capcom required me to basically quit podcasting and sort of go back to what life was like when I was at Rockstar. And I didn't really want to do that again. So it was nice to stick with an indie studio. I actually also was told to apply at Nintendo by Aonuma-san, the director of Zelda. He told me to apply at Nintendo because he wanted me on his team, and I did. And then I kind of went for it, and then my Japanese was struggling, and it basically just didn't work out. And actually, considering I have some friends who work at Nintendo now, some of the stories I hear about working inside Nintendo, I'm glad I don't.
Sounds interesting. But I'm glad you found your way. And
yes, me too. Me too.
So now, how's living in Kyoto?
It's amazing. Apart from the fact I'm so hot that I look like a tomato on the screen right now.
You look totally fine.
I'm so hot. I'm British, so dealing with the heat is like the hardest thing. So every summer I wish I was back in the UK. But other than that, Kyoto specifically is like the most beautiful place in the world. And Japan itself is super safe. It's super friendly. You can do whatever you want. It's very, very social. So I love living here because I'm quite a social person. And there are so many creatives here, especially in Kyoto. We have like 4 game studios in Kyoto. So a lot of the game developers hang out together and we just talk about game design all the time and everything. It suits me perfectly. I wouldn't trade it for anything else, really. Unless somebody has a really great game job they want me to do, then maybe. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, we will keep that in mind and maybe hit you up. You never know.
Never know.
Awesome. I think that's it, at least with all the questions people
Excellent.
had.
Yeah. No.
Thank you so much. So just some thank yous in the chat.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I can't see the chat because I'm screen sharing. Bear with me. Oh, iteration. No, don't need that. Don't need that. If I stop sharing, I should be able to.
Ooh.
Sorry, I've been looking at all of you like up at here, so I apologize a lot. I hope it wasn't boring. That's all I hope. I know I talk really fast and stuff, so I apologize for that. So do all of you study game design or some form? Or are you interested in making games?
Yeah.
The kind of thing?
Yeah, probably everybody who's sitting here wants to make games somehow in the future or currently is making games already. So Lena,
awesome.
Yeah, Lena is currently working on a demo for a game which is released on Steam, which is kind of nice, and others are working on prototypes. So there's something going on at our university. Yes.
That's awesome. That's really, really cool to hear. I wish this kind of stuff happened at my university when I was in university. This is great. Honestly, as I mentioned, you're all doing amazing stuff. Like there is no strict pathway into the video game industry. And if you're doing this kind of stuff, building a portfolio and making games, like you're already well on your way to being a part of the industry. And hopefully you'll all have great careers.
Thank you so much for the kind words. It was really an interesting talk you gave. And thank you so much for being here straight from Kyoto online.
No problem. It's been a lot of fun. No, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So for all the others, next week we got Chris Wolf talking about pitching to publishers.
Chris is great.
Yeah, he's a great guy. He's from Bavaria, so right next to our university.
There you go.
That's really interesting. He's
great. Chris is so good. He's really, really smart. He's so young, but he's super smart.
He is.
He's wonderful, and he's doing some really, really good stuff. I actually need to talk to him myself about pitching some games. So,
awesome.
No, that'll be super useful. Yeah, Chris is great.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. And awesome. So that's it for today. Thank you, everybody, for
thank you so much
for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Have a great day. I will keep you updated as soon as the footage is ready to be uploaded and stuff, okay? And we'll hit you up on Twitter. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, thank you so much, everybody. I guess I will go get some water now because I'm so hot.
Sounds good. Enjoy the evening.
Stay hydrated.
Yeah.
Yeah. You got it.
I know. I ran out of water very quickly.
Damn.
So much.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was an absolute pleasure. Good luck to everybody.
Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye.